I got this story yesterday from a mother who told me about something that happened in 1987, just 12 kilometers from where I live. It shook her family to the core. She asked me not to share her full name, but she said I could share her story. So today, I'll tell you what she wrote. Back in the fall of 1987, she and her husband lived in a small wooden cabin near the edge of the forest. They weren't rich, but they were happy. He worked as a lumberman, and she stayed home with their 8-year-old daughter, Abigail. They lived quiet, simple lives, surrounded by thick pine trees and silence. There were no neighbors nearby, just land, woods, and wildlife. They had no phones. If anything happened, help would take hours to reach them. But they were used to that life. They trusted the land, and they trusted their routine. Every morning, the husband would go out with the truck and head to the cutting site. Abigail would play near the creek behind the house. Her mother could see her from the kitchen window while doing chores. That's how things always were. But one morning, something went wrong. It was the 17th of October. The air was chilly. The ground was covered in leaves. Abigail put on her little coat and went out to play by the creek, like she always did. Her mom watched her for a few minutes from the window, then went back to folding laundry. When she looked again, Abigail was gone. At first, she thought the girl had just stepped into the trees, maybe chasing a squirrel or exploring. But 5 minutes passed. Then 10. She called out her name. "Abigail, come on in now, honey." Nothing. She stepped out onto the porch. There was no sound, just the wind and the trees swaying. She walked to the creek and looked around. There were small footprints in the soft dirt. They led into the woods. Panic started to rise in her chest. She followed the tracks for a few meters, but they faded fast in the brush. She called louder now, walking faster. "Abigail." Still nothing. She ran back to the house and waited for her husband to return. When he got back around noon, she was crying on the porch. He dropped everything, and they both went into the woods. No food, no water. Just a flashlight and hope. They searched until sunset. Her voice was hoarse from yelling. The father combed the creek's edge. He even climbed a few trees to look from above. There was no sign of her. That night, they lit a fire in front of the cabin, hoping Abigail would see it and come back. But she didn't. The next day, they walked farther, miles into the forest. They found broken branches, a single mitten, but no other sign. They began to fear the worst, maybe a mountain lion, maybe she fell and got hurt. The forest felt darker now, the trees, taller. Shadows moved even when there was no wind. On the third day, they asked a neighbor to call the sheriff from town. A small search party came out with dogs, but even they couldn't pick up a strong trail. It was as if Abigail had just vanished. Her mother wrote that she stopped eating. Her husband barely slept. They took turns walking the forest every day, even after the others stopped looking. She said, "No parent should ever bury their child, but worse is not knowing at all." A week passed, and then something strange happened. It was evening. Her husband had gone out alone while she stayed back, sitting near the fireplace. The sun had nearly set. The light outside was turning gold. That's when she saw movement out the window. Not far, maybe 30 or 40 feet into the woods. At first, she thought it was just a deer. But then it stood up, tall, taller than any man she'd ever seen. Broad shoulders, long arms, covered in dark, reddish-brown hair. The creature stood quietly behind a tree, not moving, just watching. She froze. Her heart pounded. But it didn't come closer. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there. She blinked, and then it was gone. She ran outside, looked in every direction. But the woods were quiet again. When her husband came home that night, she told him everything. He believed her, and he said something that still gives me chills. He said, "I saw it too, this morning, same place. They didn't tell the sheriff. They didn't tell anyone. Who would believe them? But now, they had a new kind of fear. Was this creature behind Abigail's disappearance? Or did it know something they didn't? After both of them saw that tall figure in the woods, things changed. They didn't speak much for the next 2 days. There was tension in the house. Not anger, just worry. They still hadn't found Abigail, and now something else was out there. Something big, something watching. But the strange part was neither of them felt like it was evil. Not really. Her husband started walking the woods again each morning, but now he took a hunting rifle, not to shoot, but just in case. He'd walk out at first light, combing through the thick trees and muddy trails, calling Abigail's name, still hoping. 3 days later, he came back to the cabin just after noon. He looked pale, shaken. He said, "I saw it again. Same spot. It was closer this time, and it looked straight at me." She asked what it did. He said, "It didn't move. It just looked like it was waiting." That evening, she decided to go out there with him. They walked together, side by side, into the area where he had seen it. She didn't know what to expect. Her hands were shaking the whole time. They reached the clearing near the creek. The trees were quiet. The air was cold. They stood still, listening. And then they heard a sound. Not a growl, not a howl, just a low, deep breath, almost like a sigh. From behind a tall pine tree, it stepped out. The creature. The mother described it in her email. It was massive, maybe 8 feet tall, broad like it could tear a tree in two, hair like wet moss, face like something between a man and an ape. But its eyes, they weren't wild. They were calm, like it understood us. She wanted to run, but her legs didn't move. The creature didn't come any closer. It just stood there looking at them, watching. And then it did something strange. It pointed, just raised its long arm and pointed slowly to the west, toward the deeper part of the forest. Then it backed away and vanished into the trees. They stood frozen. Her husband whispered, "Did you see that?" She nodded. That night, they didn't sleep. They both agreed they would go that way in the morning. Where it had pointed, they didn't know why. They didn't even know what they were hoping for. But deep down, they felt something. A pull. A sense that maybe, just maybe, Abigail was still out there. The next day, they packed food, water, and a thick wool blanket. They left early, before sunrise. The forest was still dark and wet from dew. No birds, no sounds. They followed where the creature had pointed. For hours. They climbed over fallen trees, stepped over muddy creeks, scratched their arms on brambles. The woods got thicker the farther they went. It was hard to see the sky. They stopped to rest around noon, sitting on a rock near a dry creek bed. And that's when they heard it. A sound soft and thin carried by the wind. A voice. "Mommy." The mother stood up so fast, she nearly fell over. She shouted, "Abigail." Again, "Mommy." They ran toward the sound, pushing through bushes, calling her name again and again. And then, just ahead in a shallow dip, beneath a cluster of trees, they saw her. Abigail, sitting under a bush, holding her knees, pale and tired, but alive. Her mother dropped everything and ran to her, wrapping her in her arms, crying louder than she ever had in her life. Her husband was right behind, tears streaming down his face. Abigail was shaking. Her lips were cracked. Her shoes were gone. She looked weak. They gave her water, wrapped her in the blanket, and carried her all the way back home. It took most of the day to get there. She didn't say much at first, just cried and held on to them. They cleaned her up, fed her soup, and let her sleep between them that night. But what she told them the next morning, that's what made the mother write to me. The morning after Abigail came back, the sun rose soft and golden. It warmed the windows of their little cabin. Birds chirped again. And for the first time in a week, her mother could finally take a deep breath. They let Abigail sleep in. But when she finally woke up, her voice was quiet and dry. Her parents sat on both sides of the bed, holding her hands. Gently, her mother asked, "Do you remember what happened, sweetheart?" Abigail nodded. Then, slowly, piece by piece, she began to tell them. She said she had wandered too far chasing a squirrel. She thought she could get back, but then everything looked different. She got turned around. She walked for a long time. Then it got dark. She tried to sleep under a tree. She was scared, cold, hungry. But she wasn't alone. That second night, she said something came near her. She didn't know what it was at first. She thought maybe a bear. But it didn't make loud noises. It didn't growl. It sat a little ways off. Watched her. Then it came closer, not fast. Just slowly, like it didn't want to scare her. Abigail said its eyes were shiny in the moonlight. She was too scared to scream, so she just sat there, frozen. But the creature didn't hurt her. Instead, it laid something down on the ground. A bundle of dry grass and moss. And beside it, a small pile of berries. She said she watched it all night. It never came too close, but it stayed nearby, just sitting there, watching the woods, like it was guarding her. The next morning, she tried to walk again, but her foot hurt. She had stepped on something sharp the day before. She couldn't walk far, so she curled up under a bush and cried. But the creature came back. She said it made a soft humming sound. Not music, just a deep, slow hum. It brought her another handful of berries and a big leaf filled with rainwater. Each night, it stayed near. She didn't feel scared after that. She told her mother, "I think it was trying to help me, like it knew I was little, like it wanted me to be okay." Her mother sat still, listening, holding her daughter's hand tighter than ever. Her husband didn't say anything at first. He just looked at Abigail with eyes full of quiet wonder. Then he asked, "Did it ever talk?" Abigail shook her head. "Number, but it watched me, and when I cried, it rocked back and forth, like it wanted to calm me down." She paused, then said something else that made the room feel heavier. "It didn't want me to be scared, and when I fell asleep, it stayed close. I think it stayed awake, so nothing would come near." They were speechless. She had been gone for 4 nights. And during all that time, this creature, this Bigfoot, this thing they never believed was real, had kept her alive, had kept her safe. The mother wrote in her email, "I still don't understand what we saw. But I believe it now. Whatever it is, it has a mind, it feels, it understands." She said Abigail got stronger each day, ate more, talked more, started smiling again. But she also grew quieter when the topic of the creature came up. She didn't seem scared, just thoughtful. One evening, a few days after they brought her back, Abigail stood by the window and looked out toward the woods. Her mother asked what she was thinking. She said, "I hope it's okay out there. I never said thank you." That night, they placed a small bowl of berries and some fresh cornbread on the edge of the woods, just in case. Nothing touched it that night. But the next morning the food was gone, and in its place, laid gently in the grass, was a smooth grey rock, perfectly round, clean, like a gift. Weeks passed. The leaves started to change colour. Fall was coming. Life slowly returned to normal in that little cabin near the woods. But things were never quite the same. They still cooked breakfast on the old stove, still chopped firewood out back, still walked into town every Sunday to get supplies. But there was a quietness now, a kind of deep respect. They knew they were not alone out there. The mother wrote, "I think of it every morning. I look out the window toward the trees, and I wonder, is it watching? Is it still near? And more than anything, I wonder why it helped her. She and her husband never told many people. Just one neighbor they trusted, a man named Howard. He listened, wide-eyed, then nodded and said softly, "You ain't the first to say something like that." He told them stories he'd heard when he was young, stories his father told him, about shapes in the trees, about voices in the wind, about something that lived deep in the forest, not beast, not man, but kind, hidden, wise, watching. The mother said she didn't care what people thought. She knew what she saw, and she knew what Abigail had lived through. That was all the proof she ever needed. Abigail healed well. Her foot recovered. The light came back into her eyes. But every now and then, she would still wake up in the middle of the night and say, "I thought I heard it humming." It wasn't fear. It was memory. They continued placing food at the forest's edge every few days. Just berries, bread, or some smoked meat. Sometimes it was gone, sometimes not. But now and then when it vanished, a new stone would appear, or a flower, or a small feather, laid gently on the grass. Simple things, quiet things, but meaningful. The mother called them gifts. She believed they came from it. She wrote, "I think it knows we're grateful. I think that's why it keeps leaving things. It doesn't want anything from us, just the peace of knowing we understand." Years went by. Abigail grew up, became a strong and kind woman. She moved to the city, went to school, got a job. But she still came back to visit every fall, always in October. And every time she came home, she walked the edge of the woods. Never deep inside, just close enough to stand still and say quietly, "Thank you." The mother said she never once asked her daughter to forget. She didn't want to erase it or hide it away, because what happened wasn't a nightmare. It was a miracle. She told me in her letter, "We were given something I'll never be able to explain, a second chance. A reminder that this world still holds mysteries, and some of them are not here to harm us." She also told me she never tried to find it again, not directly. They let it be, because it had done the same for them. As for her husband, he never looked at the woods the same again. He stopped hunting altogether, sold his rifle. He said, "If something like that lives out there, we don't belong walking around with weapons." He spent more time carving wood, sitting on the porch, listening. The forest became quieter, but not empty. She said now and then, if you listened just right, on a still morning, you could hear a soft humming through the trees, faint, like wind in a tunnel, but different, deeper. She believed it was still out there, still watching, still waiting, not for danger, not for attention, but for understanding. Now, here in 2025, I read that letter, and I feel the truth in her words. Not because I saw it myself, but because I know she meant every word. Her writing wasn't wild or dramatic. It was calm, honest, full of love for her daughter and for the unknown. Sometimes the world surprises us. Sometimes what we fear saves us. This wasn't a monster story. It was a story about protection, about connection, about something beyond science and cameras and books. It was about a mother's love and a creature's kindness. You don't have to believe it, but I do, and now you've heard it. So maybe next time you're walking in the woods and you feel like you're being watched, don't run, don't panic. Stand still and listen, because maybe, just maybe, you're not alone for a reason.